Stephen Miller entered the congressional hearing room with his usual air of confidence, his sharp expression revealing little emotion. The former Trump advisor, widely recognized for his strict stance on immigration, adjusted his navy tie and crisp white shirt before taking his seat at the witness table. The atmosphere buzzed with quiet tension as lawmakers prepared for what was expected to be a politically charged showdown. Across from him sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, calm but focused, reviewing her notes beneath the bright red blazer that made her stand out amid the dark suits surrounding her. The young Texas lawmaker had already gained attention for her fearless questioning style, and today would prove exactly why. Few could have imagined what was about to unfold. As Miller began his opening remarks on immigration policy, speaking with his trademark composure, Crockett's eyes stayed locked on him, studying every word. When it came time for her questioning, Miller leaned forward, a faint smirk on his face, clearly underestimating the freshman representative and former defense attorney before him. "Congresswoman, with all due respect, I'm not sure you grasp the full complexity of immigration law," Miller interrupted, cutting her off mid-question. The room went still. Members shifted uneasily. Miller had just made his first mistake. What followed would soon explode across social media. Crockett's sharp, measured response left Miller visibly shaken. By the time she delivered her final line, his confidence was gone, and the committee chairman had to call for order as the gallery erupted in applause. This wasn't just another heated exchange. It was Jasmine Crockett showing the nation what preparation and precision look like in Congress. Before diving into the full story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay updated on the latest political analysis and congressional highlights. This confrontation between Stephen Miller and Jasmine Crockett revealed deep truths about today's political climate, and you won't want to miss a single moment. Miller had arrived with the assurance of a man used to wielding power. At 39, he was a familiar face to Americans, credited with helping design some of the Trump administration's most controversial immigration measures, from the travel ban to family separation. With his slicked back hair and stern demeanor, he had built an image as the intellectual force behind America's toughest immigration stance, confident that no politician could challenge him effectively. Known for his sharp rhetoric and relentless defense of his positions, Miller rarely yielded ground. This particular hearing, focused on immigration enforcement and constitutional rights, was meant to give him yet another platform to defend his legacy. Called to testify about his tenure in the White House and his current work with America First Legal, Miller's supporters in conservative media had hyped his appearance for days, predicting he would school the liberals on immigration law. But Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had come prepared. The 42-year-old representative from Texas's 30th District wasn't just another committee member reading questions from staff. Before Congress, she had made her mark as a civil rights and criminal defense attorney, later serving in the Texas legislature. Her strong grasp of constitutional law gave her a strategic edge few in the room expected. Unlike many hearings that devolve into political posturing, this one mattered. The committee was investigating claims that certain immigration enforcement tactics had violated fundamental constitutional rights. Their conclusions could shape future legislation and executive actions on border policy. For Miller, this was a chance to protect his record and prove his influence still mattered. For Crockett, it was a rare opportunity to hold a powerful figure accountable and to speak for communities directly affected by those very policies. The hearing room overflowed with reporters, activists, and citizens, while cameras from C-SPAN broadcasted every 10th second. Security officers stood watch as the chairman gaveled the hearing to order. Today, we will examine the constitutional impact of immigration enforcement measures enacted between 2017 and 2021. He began. Our first witness is Mr. Stephen Miller, former senior advisor to President Trump and current president of America First Legal. Miller's opening statement was deliberate and defiant. The policies we enforced were both lawful and essential to protecting the nation, he said firmly. Any claims to the contrary reflect a fundamental misunderstanding of executive power and immigration law. As questioning began, a few members went easy on him, while others pressed harder. But Miller, ever confident, brushed off even the toughest challenges with the smooth assurance of a man who believed he could not be cornered. He remained calm, even allowing himself the occasional smirk whenever he thought he had skillfully dodged a tough question. Then came Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's turn. As the chairman called her name, she gathered her papers, straightened them neatly, and leaned into the microphone. Instantly, the contrast between the two was impossible to miss. Miller, in his dark, conservative suit, radiating rigid control, and Crockett, in her vibrant red blazer, exuding quiet confidence and determination. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," she began, her voice steady and deliberate. "Mr. Miller, I'd like to discuss the constitutional principle of due process in relation to the family separation policy you helped design." Miller's face tightened the moment she mentioned due process. It was clear this wasn't going to be the friendly back and forth he expected. The hearing room fell silent. What was about to unfold would soon capture the attention of millions of Americans online, revealing just how unprepared Miller was for what Crockett brought to the table. "Mr. Miller," she continued, "the Fifth Amendment guarantees due process to all persons within the United States, not only to citizens. Yet under policies you supported, thousands of asylum-seeking parents were separated from their children without meaningful hearings. How do you justify this in light of constitutional protections?" Before she could even finish, Miller leaned forward, finger raised. "Congresswoman, I need to stop you there," he said sharply. "Your premise is completely flawed. The Constitution doesn't offer the same protections to non-citizens attempting to enter the country unlawfully." "Mr. Miller," Crockett interrupted calmly but firmly, "I haven't finished my question, and I would appreciate the courtesy of completing it before you respond." Her composure was unshaken. Even as Miller's jaw tightened, he wasn't used to being corrected, especially not by a freshman representative. "By all means," he replied, his tone dripping with condescension. Crockett continued unbothered. "As I was saying, the Supreme Court has long affirmed that due process applies to all persons under U.S. jurisdiction. In Zedvadas v. Davis, the court made it clear that due process protections extend to everyone within our borders, including those here unlawfully or involuntarily. So, are you suggesting the Supreme Court got it wrong?" Miller shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable. "That case involved a completely different situation," he said defensively. "You're misunderstanding that border enforcement carries unique constitutional considerations." "I understand border enforcement quite well, Miller," Crockett countered. "What I'm asking for is the legal justification for separating families without a hearing. Can you cite any Supreme Court precedent that authorizes such actions?" The air in the room thickened. Every committee member seemed to lean forward, sensing the intensity of the exchange. Miller tried again to regain control. "Congresswoman, with respect, you're mixing up administrative procedures and constitutional law. The Department of Homeland Security has full statutory authority to detain individuals crossing the border illegally. The separations were simply a byproduct of enforcing existing laws passed by Congress." "That wasn't my question," Crockett said sharply. "I asked for a specific legal precedent supporting family separation without due process." "It's a straightforward question, Miller." A faint flush crept up Miller's face. "The legal foundation," he said, "is the plenary power doctrine, which grants the executive branch broad authority over immigration enforcement. If you were more familiar with immigration law, you would already know this." The subtle jab at her expertise was deliberate, but it didn't work. Crockett lifted a document from her desk. "I'm quite familiar with the plenary power doctrine, Mr. Miller. I'm also aware of the 2018 Ms. LV ICE ruling, where a federal judge ordered the government to reunite separated families, stating that the practice shocks the conscience and violates due process. Were you aware of that decision when you continued defending the policy?" Miller interrupted again, his tone tightening. "That ruling was narrowly focused on implementation issues, not the broader policy itself. And if we're going to talk about court cases, we should also include—" "Mr. Miller," Crockett cut in, her patience thinning. "I have limited time, and you've interrupted me 3 times now to avoid answering directly. Let me ask you plainly, did you or your team receive legal advice warning that family separation without hearings might violate constitutional rights?" A low murmur rippled through the gallery. Miller's face stiffened as he realized Crockett might have insight into internal communications. "Congresswoman," he said carefully, "executive privilege applies to internal legal deliberations, as I'm sure you know, but I can tell you that every action we took was reviewed and approved by Department Legal Counsel." The tension in the room was electric. Crockett didn't need to say another word. Her line of questioning had already done what no one else in the room had managed to do, put Stephen Miller on the defensive. Crockett nodded calmly and reached for another document resting on her stack of notes. "Mr. Miller," she began, "I have in front of me a memo dated April 23, 2018, written by Senior Department of Justice attorneys to the Attorney General. In it, they express serious concerns about the constitutionality of separating families without providing individual hearings. Were you copied on this memo?" Miller's eyes flickered with a hint of alarm. The first real sign that her questioning had caught him off guard. His response came fast and defensive. "That appears to be a confidential document, Congresswoman. I'd question how it was obtained. Besides, internal memos don't necessarily reflect the department's final position, and I'm not going to comment on leaked materials." Before Miller could continue, the chairman intervened firmly. "Mr. Miller, this document was obtained through official committee channels. Please answer the Congresswoman's question." Crockett seized the moment. "So, Mr. Miller, were you aware of these legal objections? Yes or no?" Miller shifted again. "There were numerous legal discussions about immigration policy," he said vaguely. "Different attorneys had different opinions." Crockett leaned in. "So to be clear, you were aware that DOJ lawyers raised constitutional concerns about family separations carried out without due process." Miller's tone hardened as he interrupted for the fifth time. "Congresswoman, what you're doing right now isn't oversight. It's political theater. These so-called gotcha questions are exactly why Americans lose faith in Congress's ability to have a serious policy discussion. If you want a spectacle, that's your choice." Before he could go further, Crockett's voice cut through his like a razor, controlled, deliberate, and commanding. "Mr. Miller, I'm not the one avoiding questions here. I'm a former defense attorney, and I'm asking how the policies you helped design comply with constitutional law. This isn't theater. It's oversight. That's our job." The temperature in the room shifted. The tension was visible, and even some of the Republican members looked uneasy as they watched the exchange unfold. Every camera was locked on them. The gallery sat frozen in silence, sensing that something extraordinary was happening. Crockett pressed on, unshaken. "Let's approach this from another angle. The Trump administration eventually reunited more than 5,000 children with their parents. If those separations were legally sound, Mr. Miller, would that reunification ever have been necessary?" Miller jumped in again, his sixth interruption of the hearing. "That reunification was an administrative decision, not a legal admission of wrongdoing. And frankly, Congresswoman, your interpretation continues to show a partisan." But before he could finish, Crockett delivered the line that would soon dominate social media, headlines, and every cable news discussion in the country. Her tone dropped, calm but sharp enough to cut through the noise. "Mr. Miller, I've allowed you to interrupt me 6 times now. I've watched you dance around direct questions about the Constitution, an area I practiced in long before I came to Congress. So let's stop pretending." She set her papers aside and fixed her gaze on him. The entire room went silent. "You walked into this hearing expecting deference," she said evenly. "You assumed your time in the White House would intimidate a freshman congresswoman. But before I ever stepped into Congress, I spent years defending the constitutional rights of ordinary Americans, people who didn't have the privilege of hiding behind executive privilege or political spin." Miller's face tightened, his confidence wavering. "So when you sit here and lecture me about immigration law," Crockett continued, while refusing to answer basic questions about due process, "a principle I've defended every single day in court, you're not showing expertise. You're showing contempt for congressional oversight." Crockett lifted the DOJ memo for everyone to see. "This document shows your own administration's lawyers warned that separating families without individual hearings likely violated the Constitution's guarantee of due process. Those warnings were ignored. More than 500 children were separated from their parents, some permanently, because basic records weren't even kept. That isn't border security, Mr. Miller. That isn't even competent governance." Miller tried to interrupt once more, but Crockett raised her hand to stop him. "No, Mr. Miller, I've been patient. You've had your 6 interruptions. Now, let me finish." Her voice remained steady, but her words carried unmistakable power. "The policies you defended," she concluded, "weren't just cruel, according to this memo, and multiple court rulings that followed. They were likely unconstitutional." The hearing room fell completely still. Cameras zoomed in on Miller's face, his earlier arrogance gone. Crockett leaned back slightly, her expression calm but resolute. In that moment, it was clear who had taken control of the room, and who had just lost it. As the tension in the hearing room grew, Crockett leaned forward, her calm but firm tone filling the silence. "And here's what truly concerns me," she began. "You're not here to admit mistakes or help us build a better immigration system. You're here to defend what can't be defended, and to present yourself as some kind of policy expert." Then came the line that would echo across every major platform within hours. "Mr. Miller, I may be new to Congress, but I'm not new to the Constitution. While you were busy writing press releases in the White House, I was in real courtrooms defending the rights you so easily dismissed. So don't confuse my freshman title with a lack of understanding. The difference between us isn't knowledge, it's respect." The moment broke the tension like a thunderclap. The gallery erupted into murmurs and gasps. Several Democrats tried to hide their smiles, while Republicans shifted uneasily in their chairs. The chairman had to strike his gavel multiple times before order returned. Miller's face lost its color. The confident strategist was suddenly silent, his trademark smirk gone. For the first time he seemed genuinely shaken. When he finally spoke, his words lacked conviction. "Congresswoman, I respect your legal background," he said carefully, "but I still believe the policies I supported were constitutional. The executive branch has the authority and responsibility to secure our borders." But the damage was done. Crockett had already dismantled his defense, using his own administration's documents and logic against him. "My time has expired," she said calmly, "but I request that the Department of Justice memo outlining constitutional concerns about family separation be entered into the official record." "Without objection," replied the chairman, still struggling to restore order as murmurs swept through the room. The entire exchange lasted less than 5 minutes. Yet it felt historic. In that brief window, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had not only challenged Stephen Miller's narrative, but exposed the weakness in his defense with precision, patience, and legal expertise. She didn't rely on theatrics or partisanship. She relied on facts and the law. When questioning resumed, Miller's tone was no longer commanding. His responses were cautious, even defensive. The dynamic had shifted completely. Crockett's exchange had changed the energy in the room, and soon, it would change the national conversation. Within an hour, social media exploded. Clips of Crockett's final line. "While you were writing press releases, I was defending the Constitution," spread like wildfire. On Twitter, #Crockett destroys Miller and #FEF Constitution defender began trending worldwide. TikTok and Instagram flooded with short clips of Miller's stunned expression and Crockett's unwavering poise. Cable networks replayed the exchange on loop. CNN called it a textbook example of congressional oversight done right. MSNBC's Rachel Maddow described it as masterclass in accountability. Even conservative commentators on Fox News admitted Miller had been caught off guard, though some argued that Democrats were more focused on viral moments than real policy. By the next morning, major newspapers carried the story nationwide. Crockett corners Miller on family separation policy. The New York Times, freshman Congresswoman exposes weakness in Miller testimony. Washington Post, Texas lawmakers' legal skills redefine the hearing. Dallas Morning News for Jasmine Crockett, this moment marked a turning point. Her office was overwhelmed with messages of support. What began as a tense committee exchange had evolved into a viral, career-defining moment, one that proved expertise, composure, and truth could still rise above political spin. Overnight, Jasmine Crockett's online following exploded. Her social media accounts doubled in size as clips of the hearing spread like wildfire. Inside Congress, Democratic leaders quietly took notice. Word began to circulate that the freshman lawmaker might soon earn a more prominent committee role. By the weekend, invitations poured in from major Sunday political shows eager to feature her perspective. Back in her Texas district, the reaction was electric. Supporters called her performance a proud moment for their community. "She showed exactly why we sent her to Washington," said one Dallas community leader. "She used her experience as a lawyer to hold powerful people accountable." Progressive organizations celebrated too, calling the exchange proof that electing lawmakers with real courtroom experience changes the tone of oversight. Representative Crockett demonstrated why having former public defenders in Congress matters, said one judicial advocacy group. She brought legal expertise, not empty rhetoric. For Stephen Miller, however, the hearing was a different story. Known for staying on message and handling tough interviews with ease, he suddenly faced serious questions about his understanding of constitutional law. Legal scholars publicly challenged his interpretation of the plenary power doctrine, referencing the same Supreme Court rulings Crockett had cited. Miller's group, America First Legal, quickly released a statement defending his testimony and accusing Democrats of political theater. But even some conservative insiders admitted that he had been caught off guard by Crockett's legal precision. The Department of Justice memo Crockett mentioned soon became headline news. Several major outlets filed Freedom of Information Act requests to uncover more documents about internal warnings related to the family separation policy. Congressional investigators announced plans to pursue further evidence of possible constitutional concerns that had been ignored. Beyond the immediate drama, the hearing sparked a much larger national debate. It refocused attention on the balance between immigration enforcement, executive power, and constitutional limits. Many observers noted that Crockett's questioning reframed the issue, shifting the focus from political slogans to fundamental legal principles. "What we saw wasn't just political theater," said a political science professor. "It was governance at its best. Professionals using expertise to hold officials accountable through facts, not ideology." Just a week later, a bipartisan group of senators referenced the hearing as they introduced new efforts for immigration reform. Their proposal aimed to strengthen border enforcement while ensuring policies respected constitutional protections. For millions of Americans who watched from home, the exchange stood out as a rare moment of truth in politics. A time when facts, law, and accountability took center stage over partisanship. When reporters later asked Jasmine Crockett about her viral moment, she stayed humble. "My questioning wasn't personal," she said. "It was about oversight, making sure every administration, no matter the party, follows the Constitution. That's not a partisan issue. That's an American one." The months later, the moment still echoed through Washington. When another former official was scheduled to testify before Congress, journalists began asking if he was ready for a Crockett moment. The phrase had already entered political vocabulary, shorthand for fact-based questioning that cuts through spin and exposes the truth. For Stephen Miller, the hearing didn't end his political influence, but it did crack the image of the unshakable strategist. For Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, it marked the defining moment of her early career, establishing her as a rising force in legislative oversight and a defender of constitutional principles. But the greatest impact was felt beyond politics. For the American people, the exchange served as a reminder of what democracy should look like. When real expertise meets accountability, when evidence outweighs partisanship, and when the Constitution stands as the ultimate test for every policy. Even months later, the video of that confrontation continued to circulate, gaining millions of views and thousands of comments. Viewers praised it as one of the rare congressional moments where truth and integrity shone brighter than political spin. If you found this deep dive into the Crockett-Miller exchange insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Stay tuned for more political analysis and real moments of accountability that shape American democracy. And let us know in the comments, which political showdowns should we break down next?